Joey, I am so excited to discuss this book, The Cobalt Curse, with you. We have a long story, and there was a long pilgrimage to this book. And just before we start, if you could give our listening audience context.
Absolutely. Well, it's so good being with you again, Virginia. The foundation for the Cobalt Curse, which is a modern thriller, it started with the previous title that I wrote called Among Kings. And in fact, we did an interview years ago on Among Kings. But Among Kings is a historical fiction novel which chronicles the journey of William Shepherd and Samuel Lapsley, the first African-American and white missionary to go to the Congo in 1890. They ended up taking on King Leopold of Belgium, who had enslaved the entire Congo nation for the rubber trade. And that led to the world's first international human rights trial. So I took all that history from Among Kings and we said, okay, I wrote the historical fiction novel about what happened in the Congo back in the 1890s or so, Scramble for Africa, the Industrial Revolution, and fast forward into a modern day thriller that bakes in a lot of the still very current themes of things that are actually going on in the Congo today, in the Eastern Congo. So a common question that I get from people who read The Cobalt Curse, the novel, they say, well, how much is real and how much is made up? And it's really, even though novels are fictional, this one is really based upon a number of true stories of concrete realities that are going on in the Congo to this very day.
I was beyond impressed at how you managed to integrate the brutal reality of a dark history of a beautiful people in a beautiful nation. And I was beyond impressed at how concise and articulate and just historically accurate you managed to interject the facts. It was a dark week in the Congo last week.
Absolutely.
So before we get deep into the book, and I ask you more specific questions around the development of the project, bring us up to speed. My listening audience, I can tell you, and most people I speak to are relatively ignorant, and the mainstream media has gone dark on this story.
Right. Yeah. What most people aren't aware of, people are familiar with the Rwandan genocide that happened back in 1995, where over 1 million people died in just 3 short months in Rwanda. What happened immediately after that is the Hutu tribe, who was responsible for the genocide, they fled. They were pushed out by the Tutsis, many of whom were slaughtered, that 1 million people. So the genocide pushed west into the Congo because the Congo and Rwanda border one another as nations. So what happened after that point, with that genocide pushing west in the Congo, that launched a series of 2 Congo civil wars. So through war, starvation, disease, what most people don't realize, in the past 25 years, over 6 million people have died in the Congo. It's the greatest humanitarian crisis since World War II. And most recently, the Congo had gone through a period, the Eastern Congo I'm speaking of, it had gone through a period of relative stability. But just this last January in 2025, one of the 40 guerrilla groups that border Rwanda and the Eastern Congo, the guerrilla group M23, which is a Rwandan-backed guerrilla group, it contains many Tutsi militia. They invaded the city of Goma, where my friends Camille and Esther Ntoto live and work. They run an organization. They're friends of yours as well, Virginia. They run Africa New Day. It's one of the leading humanitarian organizations in the Eastern Congo. M23 invaded Congo this last January, invaded Goma. They're now to the south in the South Kivu province of Bukavu. And and over 3,000 people have died. Water was shut down, electricity was shut down, internet was shut down. Those things have since been restored, but the atrocities continue. And just 2 days ago, 70 people were ushered into a church in the north part, North Kivu area in Kasanga, and there were 70 Christians who were beheaded by a Muslim extremist group. So the context for this novel, The Cobalt Curse, ever since going back to Among Kings and King Leopold, who stole the ivory and the rubber for the Industrial Revolution, the Congo has had what they call a mineral curse. It's one of the richest nations in the world in terms of minerals. There's an estimated $27 trillion worth of minerals in the Eastern Congo, and those minerals are cobalt, gold, tantalum, tin, tungsten, copper, oil, you name it, diamonds. People are familiar with the movie Blood Diamond that came out years ago. So those conflict minerals, there are all sorts of multinational companies. Chinese have a huge presence, especially in the southern region of the Congo. But ever since M23 pulled in this last January and these atrocities continue, the Congo is a hot spot. And so my purpose in writing The Cobalt Curse was to both educate, this is what's happening in this section of the world, but to do it in an entertaining way where we're dealing with human rights issues. It's a love story. It's kind of a romantic thriller, the book is, because this human rights lawyer, Kai Baldwin, he's trying to go after his kidnapped former fiancée. All that to say, I created the story world to give, as you already noted, Virginia, both the history of the Congo, but also the present day conflicts and very real issues that are going on in the Congo today.
I'm stunned about some of the details that you just shared about Camille and Esther. As you know, with the Rest and Recover program, I'm working with first responders, veterans, and I am very involved with that discussion here in the United States and the confusion, chaos, and dis-ease that is afflicting almost every sphere of influence here in America. Mm-hmm. How can our listening audience support the efforts or learn more about the efforts of Camille and Esther Ntoto?
Yes, they can go to the Africa New Day website. So it's africanewday.org. In French, it's Un Jour Nouveau. They also have a website for that. And what Africa New Day does, they do phenomenal work in the Eastern Congo, in the town of Goma, and they do education. They have a school of over 1,000 kids. They do leadership training. They do trauma recovery work for women who have been raped. Eastern Congo is known as the rape capital of the world. And to give you a picture of what happened when M23 invaded, everyone in the Goma prison, they were let out and they escaped. And the rapes just skyrocketed in Goma. So Africa New Day is actively ministering. They work with Heal Africa in Goma. So they do job training, they do microfinance, they do all sorts of things. Clean water, food. As a result of this M23 invasion, right now there's over 400,000 displaced people in the Eastern Congo. And so it was perfect timing. Last summer they installed a clean water well in one of the humanitarian camps. And so there's fresh water there. But the risk of, with sanitation problems, the risk of cholera is really high as well. So again, Africa New Day, go to their website, africanewday.org, learn more about their education, their advocacy, their leadership training. It's a phenomenal organization. I've been involved with them for many, many years now.
Wow. Thank you for that, Joey. I had to interject that into this segment of the interview because I had no idea the magnitude of the problem. And for the benefit of our listening audience, I just want us to have some perspective. Because if 70 homosexuals were murdered anywhere in the world, it would be Frontline News.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If 70 Muslims were executed by Christians, it would be all over the news.
Right, right.
There's this narrative and this political, geopolitical confusion, chaos, and dis-ease that's generated that really diminishes the value of life. So anything that doesn't advance life and liberty and justice and light, life, liberty, love, justice, something is wrong.
Right.
So when the world goes dark on these narratives, and something as accessible as the Cobalt Curse is within your grasp, I invite everyone to listen carefully to the rest of this interview, which most people listening to us do not know that the Cobalt Curse was inspired by the original script, The Congo Redemption, which was the winner of 5 screenwriters writing awards.
Mm-hmm.
And so this isn't just a little book you rolled out of bed and decided to write. This is an ongoing conversation for the last almost 20 years of your life.
Yep.
So, Joey, what an honor to have you. And thank you for filling us in on what's happening there. But you went to which I didn't know, you went to Eastern Congo. How did it influence certain scenes in the Cobalt Curse? Because this book is captivating. You go into a lot of detail here. You really go deep.
Well, when I went to the Eastern Congo with African New Day, it's been 10 years. I went there in 2015, and I went there to do some film work with them. I was interviewing Camille and Esther and members of their team. That was the original purpose. So when I went there, it wasn't so much to research for the Cobalt Curse, because I hadn't even thought about it yet. But when the idea for the Cobalt Curse came up, I really reflected on a number of events that I went through when I was there. So one scene in particular, one storyline is my lead character. His name is Dr. Kai Baldwin. He's on a crash course mission. It reads kind of like Jason Bourne meets Indiana Jones. He's on this crazy
it really does
adventure to find his former fiancée who's been kidnapped in the Congo. So he gets partnered with a child soldier named Dante Inferno. So when I originally went to the Congo in 2015, I had not planned to write the Cobalt Curse yet. But when I got the idea for writing this novel, I reflected back on a number of scenes and places that I had visited in the Eastern Congo. One in particular, one of my characters, his name is Dante Inferno. He is a child soldier who's helping Dr. Kai Baldwin find his former fiancée who's been kidnapped. So in Goma, I went to a metal workshop, which was filled with Congolese workers, and all these men, there was probably 20 men in this big yard. They're making these beautiful cast iron doors and anything related to metal fabrication. They were learning a trade and how to create doors and windows and beautiful things. Well, all of the men in this metalworks yard, they were former militia soldiers.
Wow.
And they had been a part of numerous different types of militia groups, and the organization, the ministry that was helping them come out of militia soldiering to teach these men a trade. So in the metalworks yard, there's a scene in the novel that's a pivotal place where there's a discovery made about Dante Inferno. And then later on in the book, all the former militia soldiers, Kai enlists their support leading up to the final battle to rescue his former fiancée, Dr. Brooke Ryan. So that's one example how I used an actual place that I visited and inserted that into the storyline.
I'm so well acquainted with the history because over the last 10, 12, 13, 14 years or so, you've really educated me as to the dark history. It's unthinkable atrocities have been committed there.
Yeah.
And the world is absolutely, completely unaware of them. This particular character that you just described and your visit there, and it's hard to believe that you actually met guys that were part of the militia there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that you saw them in that context. It's almost mind-blowing.
Yeah. What's also interesting about the area, for people that really like exotic locations for the books that they read, the volcano that stands probably about 11,000 feet above the city of Goma in the eastern Congo, the name of the volcano is Mount Nyiragongo, and it is one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world. And back in 2020, 2021, they had an eruption where lava flow was, through the streets. When I was there in Goma in 2015, there's still lava all over the city from the lava flow. So I won't give all the scene stealers away, but the volcano does play prominently in the story because it's a real volcano. It's like Mauna Kea sitting right there.
That's what I mean. These aren't things you just made up to fill up space and pages. Yeah. No. Yeah. Okay, tell us about this major character and the unresolved pain and grief in this storyline.
Yeah.
Just briefly, without giving it all away, tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah. My main character, Dr. Kai Baldwin, he is one of the leading human rights lawyers in the world. He's very famous for his human rights work. He negotiates peace agreements among warring nations. And he has a history with his former fiancée. They were both raised as missionary kids. Both of their parents were best friends, medical doctors. But there's an event that happens in Kai's life. All I'll say is that it involves a plane crash, and someone very dear to him dies. And what that does, because of his unresolved grief, it puts a wedge between him and Brooke and their wedding engagement. And this is where I think it really does tie in, Virginia, with your work with R.E.S.T, because you well know that when people have unresolved grief in their life, it leads to medical crises, it leads to unresolved emotional hurt, pain, acting out, all sorts of different things. So,
and not just in their lives, but generationally.
Yeah, absolutely.
The implications are generational.
Right. So Kai's outer story is that he has to rescue his kidnapped former fiancée. His inner story is the unresolved grief that he has to deal with. And ultimately, how does he deal with forgiveness for himself, for Brooke, for God, for this tragedy that's happened into his life? So I'm really trying to weave in an emotional narrative, because grief is something we all experience in one way or another. And it's not just, it doesn't have to be just with death. It could be relationship loss. It could be job loss. It could be divorce. It could be medical crisis.
The brutality of geoeconomic problems.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Confusion, chaos, and disease, and the tug of war of the powers that be, and the implications it has in our practical lives as well. Yeah. But I'm excited to talk to you about some ideas I have and how we can have this discussion with people about what you're very well acquainted with, which is your work with grieving families for so many, many, many years. Yeah. How did that inform your work?
It informed it in a huge way, because just the education that I received in my grief recovery training, and then also the education of learning with people and learning from their stories. Everybody's story is different. There are themes that overlap. So that informed my writing a lot, because my hope is, as people read this book, is as they watch Kai go through his journey of his unresolved grief and the things that led to him getting a resolution, that helps people reflect. And that's why we we read novels. That's why we go to the movies. That's why we'll binge watch limited television again and again, because we want to feel, we want to learn, we want to grow, and we learn through other people's stories. So that's one hope I have is that people can learn a little bit about loss in their own life.
Yeah, but also what's of specific interest to me, even how the book opens and the relaxed outlook, view, perspective, and how out of touch we are in the West with the reality that most of the world lives in. But right. Congo, it's been a heritage for them since the late 1800s. They've been plundered by the world.
Yes.
And I can't wait till we get deeper into that, but I'll let everyone become acquainted with your work. And when Among Kings comes out, I just can't even breathe. I'm so happy you're still working on the film version of the history. You go deep into the history of it.
Right.
And by the way, Joey, thank you. You've maintained integrity in the stories you tell and the events and the narratives that you bring into your storylines. That struck me, by the way. But you merge human rights issues and modern technology. What were you hoping that your readers might learn or better understand? This is an excellent question, I think. And thank you for suggesting it, because I know this is at the heart of what you're doing. Yeah.
The book, it's funny because as I've talked to different readers and people who've read the book, they go, wow, you really cover a lot of topics in this book. And I could be guilty for trying to put 1,000 pounds into a 100-pound bag. But when we look at the issue of minerals and technology and everything that we have with our modern devices, our phones, our iPads, our computers, really important to understand that 70% of the world's cobalt, which is used to create lithium batteries, that cobalt is used in our cell phones. It's used in our electronic devices. It's used in many, many different modern technologies. Much of that cobalt is mined by people who are dramatically underpaid, if not mined illegally by men, women, and children. And so the book is not advocating, okay, we've got to get rid of our cell phones and throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but it does advocate for a clean chain of titles that for all the multinational companies that are working in places like the Congo, that the minerals are not being mined illegally and there's a clean chain of title, because in many, many cases they're mined illegally and they're exported out of the nation. And so it's really important for people to understand, where are our minerals sourced and how are people treated? Are we raising impoverished people their standard of living, giving them a day wage so that they can have hope and promise for their future and for their families?
Joey, would it be inappropriate to say the massive modern day slavery to mine these resources is taking place in the Congo?
Oh, that's absolutely true. There's a whole section in the book that talks about illegal mining and child soldiering. In the Eastern Congo, they've identified at least 40 different militia groups that use child soldiers, child miners throughout the Eastern Congo to mine for cobalt, gold, tin, tungsten, you name it. There are so many minerals. And so there are huge human rights abuses going on throughout the Congo. Not the entire Congo, but throughout the Congo.
Wow. Americans are so distracted by conversations that are manipulated about violations of human rights in this beautiful nation. And I say that as an immigrant, not as an American.
Yeah.
And right. I wonder who is peddling these narratives of confusion, chaos, and dis-ease about atrocities and injustices being committed here.
Yeah.
While the reality and the brutality of what's happening to our neighbors across the Atlantic is not being discussed. Yeah. Everybody's trying to come to America, not leave America.
Right.
But what's happening between this and human trafficking, and I don't know, does this fall into that narrative of human trafficking?
Well,
as well?
absolutely, because any time any man, woman, or child is abducted and made to work illegally, that's a form of trafficking.
There was a time not so long ago when they were brutalized and tortured. Can you inform our listening audience a little bit about what they were doing to keep them confined to the mines and to manipulate the masses with fear?
Right. Well, a good example, all the current research shows that just in the Congo alone, let alone all of Central Africa, in the Congo alone, there between Congo and Rwanda, there's an estimated between 40 to 50,000 child soldiers. So if you have 40 to 50,000 child soldiers, who are they in charge of? They are in charge of the people the other children that are mining illegally. There's a whole scene in the book that I set the story in one of these illegal mining operations, but it's a real problem.
Well, I see images that their very limbs were amputated.
Yes, yeah.
And when did that begin? Who
Well,
ordered it?
Yeah,
and is it still going on?
The limb amputation dates back to Leopold II when he owned the Congo Free State, where villages were required to pay a rubber tax for the amount of rubber mined in each local area. If a village did not meet their quota for the rubber tax, they chopped off hands, and we have journalistic documented evidence dating back to the 1800s of children with missing limbs. To the degree that that's happening today, I don't know, but we do know, for example, in the movie Blood Diamond that came out a number of years ago, when Sierra Leone had its civil war in Western Africa, hand chopping was a very, very clear way to intimidate and incite fear amongst the population. Rape is a weapon of warfare. So all these forms of violation and mutilation are frequently used throughout Africa, if not other parts of the world, to terrorize people.
There is so much we can do from here because, as you well documented in your books and the story you told over and over again, and of course, my background in photography, this impacted me. But what was happening in the United States, sometimes we hear these stories and we can be overwhelmed by the brutality of what you're describing. Mm-hmm. But I want everyone to know that it was the fruit of innovation here in America and what was happening with Kodak that pierced the darkness of these atrocities that were taking place in the Congo. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was George Eastman's Kodak camera. One of the earliest missionary photographers was a woman. It was a female photographer. She was a missionary by the name of Alice Seeley Harris. And she was one of the first women to document these abuses in the Congo of how King Leopold was terrorizing people. So not only did she take photos, send them back to England, those photos were circulated through lantern lectures. Lantern lectures were the early slideshows before they had PowerPoints. So not only did she use the camera, William Shepard, his missionary partner, Samuel Lapsley, they used the camera to document human rights abuses. And these photos that came from Africa, they are literally the first photos globally that were used to document human rights abuses.
Joey, this is your life's work. And I'm so thankful to have had even a small part of these conversations with you because this is phenomenal. One final question. We've talked in the past about the power of story. Why are people so drawn to story? And what do you hope readers will enjoy and learn from these stories? We touched a little bit about what they'll learn, but what is it about story, Joey?
I think we are drawn to story because it's really at the DNA level, it is something that helps us understand our lives. And we look into other people's stories as a mirror to really find our own, or to find out where we are in our story. And the stories that endure for generations are those that have that imprint of truth in them, beauty, truth, and goodness. And so our heart is drawn to want that and to see that. Even in difficult, dark stories, there are always the possibility of threads of redemption. And I think that's what every man and woman are looking for in their life. And so that's why we read novels. That's why we listen to music. We go to the movies to both entertain, but also to learn and to discover more about where we're at in our story. So at the most simple level, I think it's that.
It's beautiful. We think in story, we plan in story, we communicate in story, and it's woven into our very anatomy. I think that's beautiful. Yeah. Joey, thank you so much for taking time to discuss this ginormous project and dream that you've been working on. And you've made it so accessible for us to join you in this journey of getting some very important part of our story out. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a part of history that people, by and large, have absolutely no knowledge of.
Yeah. Well, I'm honored that you'd have me on the show like this, Virginia, and I hope that for your listeners that they pick up a copy, they're entertained, they're educated, they're inspired. I hope they really have a lot of fun with it, because it's a crazy romp through the Congo jungle, but they're going to learn and laugh and have a good time. I had fun writing it.
Thank you, Joey.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about R.E.S.T, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of R.E.S.T. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of R.E.S.T, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to R.E.S.T with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.